So I think I have met most of you, but not all of you. I'm Ren Smith, and I'm Interpretive Programs Manager. And this is the first year we've done a hybrid Bug Fest type of event that we're calling Bugapalooza. And I started thinking about the fact that we could, have people from all around us begin to find ways of offering programs virtually. And one of the first people that came to my mind was Margaret Carreiro. And I was familiar with her work primarily on Facebook and her work with the wild ones. She's quite a community activist, what I would also call a advocate for turning urban spaces into more rich biodiverse spaces, both urban and suburban, I should say. So in a lot of ways, I feel like I know Margaret, though I've never met her. How about that? We both agree we need to.
Been wanting to for a while, and then kind of COVID got in the way a bit. Yeah,
it did indeed. Oops, we got people in the waiting room, so let me admit. So, but Margaret, Dr. Margaret Carreiro is one of the things that I know. She really has a very strong interest in ecology and those. And I think the thing that happened with Margaret, you tell me if I'm right about this. You're a big picture person, so you're really interested in ecology and how it all works together. And here more recently, you've got more into the smaller details. Even though
I've only gotten into the bugs, really interested in knowing and doing stuff just in the last few years. And I didn't work with them really professionally. I did other forms of ecology, nutrient cycling, plants, soils, and how cities and towns affect nutrient cycling in forests, particularly. I did a lot of work with the Olmsted Parks Conservancy, a lot of experiments with them, a little in Iroquois Park, but mostly Cherokee. And
the urban tree canopy, what?
Yeah, and I was on the committee and we wrote the urban tree canopy guidelines that was then bid upon and done by a company, a private concern who did it. But we wrote the guidelines of what they were to do and how to do it. Yeah. So, and it got done. It was like everything came together. It was like mind blowing. It was just great. And so we have data. And whenever you hear the 54,000 trees a year that are whatever, that comes from that study.
Okay, well, we really appreciate that work very much. And I'm going to stop talking because I think you're the reason that they're here tonight. So I'm going to get out of the way and welcome everyone. I know some people just now joined, so I'm glad that you're here as well.
Jacqueline's here. Yeah.
All right. Hi. All right, Margaret. So shall we just?
Yeah, I'm going to share the screen now, and hopefully all this will work. What? It's this one. Oops, that's not it. Did it work? No, it did not. Uh-oh, I hit the wrong darn thing.
That's all right. We're hanging out here. We're all good.
Okay.
And while Margaret's looking for that too, feel free if you want to turn your camera on, you can. Some of you may want to be keeping it off because that does keep the bandwidth from slowing down your speed. There we go, Margaret.
Okay. And had that happened before. Okay, all right. Let me make it bigger. And I am now going to select a little laser pointer in case. Do you see the laser pointer just below the fireflies?
Yes,
it's a red thing.
Yes.
Okay, so I might use that on occasion. But anyway, hey, thank you for coming tonight, folks. Hopefully this will be fun and informative, and it will end on a positive note. Although at the beginning, I have to kind of set the stage for why we're urging people to do these things about saving nature species. It's not just for professionals anymore. It's not just conservation managers and such. It gives you a chance to do something about what we all know is going on, and that is a lot of species are their populations are decreasing really rapidly, both here and abroad, and some are going extinct. And it's a very sad thing of affairs that we're in. But we can staunch that. And there's various ways that we can do that. And I'm going to suggest one. Anyway, but it really all comes down to, there are resources everybody needs and knowledge and other things. But if you have those, it's really about people showing how they love other species in many ways, and showing that we care about them. And that's really what all of this is going to hinge on, is people caring. So education is so important about getting people aware of about biodiversity in their backyards, literally in this case. So, and the term for that is known as biophilia, which you may have heard of. It basically means love of other life forms. And there's lots of examples. We show that all the time with our pets and our house plants and all that. And so we know it exists even in cities. And we know that we bring it indoors, but we're trying to get people to think about bringing it outdoors too, and getting to know other species around them, including our bugs. So the big take-home messages for this talk basically is, many species are really in big trouble right now. I really call it SOS time. It's save our species time. But the good news is you don't have to just sit on your hands or say, all I can do is donate to a conservation organization or something and to save the Amazon. We really need to be focusing on what we can do in cities and towns around us. And that means ordinary people can have a big role to play, especially if you're lucky enough to own some property, some land, have yard space. Not everybody does, but if you do, you are in a position to make, really collectively, all of us, a very big difference for species survival rates where development has already happened. And this can bring rewards and a win-win for both nature and people. So it's not just about saving our species. It's also, I think, about saving our own selves in many spiritual and ethical ways. So, so setting the stage, it shouldn't be too surprising that other species are in deep trouble, because humans, particularly in the last 100 years, have been very busy claiming Earth for ourselves, and we are a huge, important force transforming the Earth and its waters. And there was a report, and I just shortened this, but the Living Planet report came out 5 years ago, done by the World Wildlife Fund. It's a big one, and showing just how astoundingly rapid the decline in wildlife has been since 1970, which for many of you in the audience, we were young adults during that time, and it doesn't seem like it's too ancient history. So it's in our lifetimes that this has happened. And I'm just going to give you one number, that Earth's vertebrate populations, its birds and lizards and fish, et cetera, are down 58% since 1970, the populations. I'm going to focus this talk on birds and insects because that's what we can mostly do, I think, in our yards. There are other wildlife, but we're not talking about saving lions and tigers and bears here, which but we can do a lot for birds and insects and a few others. So a huge study came out this past just a couple years ago, and this citizen scientists played a big role in getting these numbers, but we've lost an astounding 3 billion birds in the US and Canada since 1970. So 1 in every 4 birds that were alive back then are gone. And of course, that's not evenly distributed across all species. 46 bird species have lost, and we've really lost a lot of our grassland birds in particular. Meadow and grasslands is a habitat type that is we need more of, to create more of in large ways across this nation, because most of it was lost for raising our crops. It was agricultural land. And now it's agricultural land. So the other big one, not only are birds are in deep trouble, but believe it or not, insects are as well. And scientists have even called this the Insect Armageddon. That isn't just, you know, some newspaper person calling it that. Scientists are calling it that. 73 insect studies around the world show a decline in the world's insect species, and 40% could be of the world's insect species could be gone in the next few decades. And the most affected groups are butterflies and moths, probably because they have the caterpillar life stage and then the adult stage that has different food requirements. So complex life cycle where requirements have to be met for both parts of the life cycle. And then native bees are really in big trouble. Beetles, believe it or not, are also in that group. And then the aquatic insects, those that have part of its lifetime in streams and ponds, and then the rest of it, you know, like dragonflies have their earlier nymph stages in streams and ponds, but also in the air. So they have the worst of both worlds in many ways because we have polluted water. There's lots of things going on land that is to their detriment as well. So, and this includes stoneflies, caddisflies, and mayflies. So if you're into fishing, you should be very concerned about this because this is fish food. So why care about it? Well, in terms of people, one obvious one is the fact that many of these insects are pollinators. And in large regions of rural China, and this has been the case for years now, they lost all their bees. And in their orchards now, fruit trees, they have to hand pollinate them. And maybe you can see right here, this woman climbed up an apple tree, it looks like, and has this long wand with a brush here. She is hand pollinating, going back and forth between every single flower. Now, China has a lot of people, right? They have 1.5 billion people. They can afford to put labor to do this. But can you imagine what an apple would cost if we had to resort to this in the United States? We're already paying sometimes 75 cents or $1 for a big apple. You can imagine. So the other is, the one that I want to concentrate on for this talk, is that there's a lot of wildlife impacts as well of loss of insects, because insects are in the middle of the food web. And as such, they have impacts on what eats them and of course on what they eat as well. But in terms of vertebrates like birds, insects are a huge food source and they're an important one because they're high in protein and nitrogen. And that's needed to grow, especially to grow from a nestling to a fledgling. And someone did a study, a chickadee has to feed their young, if I don't know how many are in a nest on average, that I couldn't get, but they have to feed them anywhere between 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars in 16 days so they can fledge. I found that astounding. And right now people are saying goodbye to our hummingbirds, and we're putting out the sugar water feeders because they need a lot of energy right now. They do for these long flights. But what they need to raise young, what people don't realize is their diet really consists 80% of insects and spiders. So they need that protein. The sugar is just, you know, it will build up the energy and the fat reserves in order to make it to the Central and South America. So here comes the part about you. You know, what can we do about it? There's a lot of things we can do about it, but I'm going to focus on one. And basically, if you have a yard, you can start managing your yards with birds and insects in mind. I'm going to, sorry, there's something here. Get rid of there. With birds and insects in mind. And you might say, okay, but can it really matter? So I went through this with a student who did the mapping for me. And this is Jefferson County, and it's the most urban county. So, you know, it's got the least amount of plantable space probably. But what I wanted to find out is how much plantable space is in residential areas, residentially zoned land. And if you take out the streets and the houses, okay, that footprint what remains is largely plant space. And that's colored blue on this map. That's plantable. And what's green on this map, as a contrast, just to show you the difference in potential here. What's green is our current parklands in metro parks, including the largest for true forest in any metropolitan area in the country. We're very lucky to have the Jefferson County Forest. What doesn't show up here is the parklands in green because it's not metro. I couldn't pull that in there, but I did account for it in my calculations. There's 20 square miles of parks in our county, which is doing pretty good, 6% of the county area, whereas there's 120 square miles of plantable space in residential areas, 36% of the county. It's the blue on the map. Now that's potential. And I think you can see if we even started in most of this space that's planted, we planted in lawns largely. If we were to just do 10% of this blue, okay, and put it in what I'm recommending is native plant gardens, okay, then we would have 50% more. We'd have 9% of the county green. And this would be very important as habitat, as stepping stones across the harsh urban terrain in our, in our properties all along here, and also serve as buffers for some of our parks to buffer the organisms that are living in those parks from anything truly too harsh in their environment surrounding them. So what we need you to start thinking about is having you become a conservation manager too. And the message really is, and this is worldwide, not just me saying this for Jefferson County, our park systems nationwide and globally can't do the job of keeping species going by themselves anymore. The scientists have done the calculations. We would need to reserve 5 to 10% of all the terrestrial lands on this planet in conservation space. And let's face it, that isn't likely to happen. So we can do something here where we live and work, and it doesn't interfere with our use of the land. Anyway, it's all hands on deck time. And so I'm suggesting here's something you can do about it. So what cities and towns especially can do in terms of conservation, like I said, we're not going to save the lions and tigers and bears, but we can keep our common native species common. And that is a big deal. You want to keep seeing goldfinch? There's some things you can do about it, for instance. And of course, one of them, and this is a picture I took not too far away from where I live, plant less lawn. We're asking people, I understand some lawn space is fine, but do we have to have so much of it? We pour all those resources into it and we can't even eat it. Right? So can we convert some percentage that seems comfortable for you, 10 or 50% of that space into a native plant garden, particularly for pollinators, and make that offering to nature? Nature takes good care of us. Maybe we could consider taking good care of it in our own backyards. The other thing we can do is please don't use insecticides. And I have been so alarmed in the last 5 years or so here in my neighborhood to see more of these people who are contracting with all these mosquito control people. And they all claim it's organic. And I can tell you more about that in questions if you want to know more about that. They are not, what they're spraying is not specific to mosquitoes. They're insect neurotoxins that they're spraying. It kills everybody. It kills the bees, the caterpillars, the butterflies, the moths, the fireflies, the lady beetles, you name it. Not just mosquitoes. So obviously, a lot of people are going to start small, but about 16, 17 years ago, I converted my entire backyard, it was lawn, into a garden, a native plant garden. So I've had, a good 16-year head start on a lot of folks. And I decided to just do it all at once, but that is not what I'm suggesting here. You can just do a small 10 by 10 foot plot if that's what you feel comfortable starting with, because even that while it may not be great habitat, it's at least a rest stop. It's a rest stop for, butterflies and bees to, get gassed up basically with pollen and nectar. So, do what's comfortable for you. But the larger the garden is, it makes sense. And the more different kinds of native plants you have in it, you can support more and different pollinators, birds, and small mammals. And so what is it we have to provide them? Well, what do you need to survive? Well, just kind of apply that to say the pollinators. These pollinators, insects, are going to need food for their entire life cycle. That means providing, say, nectar and pollen for adult pollinators for all 3 seasons that we can grow plants. Also providing flowers of different sizes, shapes, and colors. And that's because, it's like, say, bees, there's long-tongued bees and short-tongued bees, and they have preferences for flowers of different shapes, like tubular flowers versus the flat, like coneflower or daisy-shaped flower. Colors, you saw a couple of days ago, the other presenters show you how colors matter and how what bees see is very different than what we see too. So, and different bees, etc., are attracted to different colors. Bumblebees in particular like blue a lot, as it turns out. And then entire life cycle for butterflies and moths, that means providing what we call host plants for the caterpillars that are often, not necessarily, but often different species than the ones that they would go after as adults. And host plants can differ for every different species of moth and butterfly. Some of them are quite specific, like the monarch butterfly that will only lay eggs on different species of milkweeds, but some of them have broader tastes and can lay eggs on, say, 6 to 10 different species of trees or perennial plants in your garden. So paying attention to this and a few other things can transform a garden, what we see as a garden, into what I see often, and that's conservation space. A garden can be conservation space. And we can create one that is pretty. People sometimes say, oh, I want to keep the aesthetics going, and that's an issue. But, there's lots of native flowers that can feed not just our eyes aesthetically, but also our pollinators and birds. So I'm going to take you through a tour of some of my favorite plants for all seasons. And something's happening to mask my thing. I don't know why. But so I'm going to just kind of show you some plants for all 3 seasons and tell you a little bit about why I think they're cool or important. And so from April to May, that's a really important time. If you have part shade and part sun, start growing plants that are our forest ephemeral flowers, the native plants that grow in the forest before the leaves come out on the trees. So, and these plants, like the bluebell, come up, they put out their flowers, they get pollinated, and then they make fruit and die back by, oh my goodness, like early June or such, or even earlier than that. So, but they are very important. If you have a place that's shady, not deep shade, you can play a big role, because a lot of, like, bumblebees in particular, overwinter as adults. They emerge from where they've been hiding and sheltering over winter, and they are hungry. So these early spring flowers really play an important role in helping these young queens survive and get to the point of starting their nests. And bluebells are a wonderfully beautiful plant that can do that. Others are celandine wood poppy. They offer a different color and more open flower plan for different pollinator types. And then one that I adore and I think needs to be sold more, I really do, is the Bladder Nut Shrub. Oh my God, by April, They are loaded by mid-April, loaded with bunches of these bell-shaped flowers that the bees, especially bumblebees and honeybees, adore. Oh, they're all over it. They just give me more of this stuff. It's a great one. It's easy to grow. Another good one, serviceberry, you may have heard of, and it's a different flower shape. You can see different flower shape than here for different tongued bees. And late in that succession is one that I really like, the appendage waterleaf. And again, another great one for bumblebees. A little later, one of my favorites, I just push it all the time, I just love it, is the Missouri primrose with open, but boy, do they make an offering of tons of pollen. I've watched these little, especially these guys, these green metallic bees here, sweat bees, come by the droves, and they go on at the bottom of the stem and they just strip that pollen right off of it. There's so much of it. They like it a lot. You know, a great shrub, if you've got sun, at least more sun than shade, is the St. John's wort and shrubby St. John's wort. And it has this unusual, like all St. John's worts, these lovely shaped flowers with tons of stamens, a whole big corona, a little crown of stamens. So this is a good one for insects that like pollen. It doesn't really make nectar, so don't expect to see butterflies on it. But boy, do they make a lot of pollen for you. It's one of my favorites. You can hear the bee activity on this shrub from about 20 feet away. Really, it's incredible. Oops, come on. Oops, mine's not moving. Come on, there. One, you know, there's lots of plants you can grow, obviously, but another one that I really like because it blooms for a long time and gets to be anywhere from 18 inches to 3 feet tall, depending on your soil, but it fits in color-wise with a lot of different plants, and that's the anise hyssop. And it blooms anywhere from late June to late September, particularly if you've got a population of them growing. So there's ones that overwinter and then the seedlings come up and bloom later in the summer. And everybody loves this thing. And not only that, I call this one a win-win for nature and people. It makes these leaves, it's in the mint family, but it doesn't have runners. So it's not going to get out of control, but it is in the mint family. It makes, as you can guess, and as long as you like the taste of anise, these leaves make a great tea, especially in the evening. Love it. So it's a win-win for nature and people. And then into late September, what I have in my garden is, among others, is the tall Coreopsis. Coreopsis loaded with blossoms that all kinds of little bees like this little metallic green sweat bee here. And this is a hoverfly on, and I also have New England aster, another really good one. And both of them are blooming in my backyard garden. So it extends it into as far as I can through September. And then most of the bees are, you know, kind of, and others are not as active after that. But how can we turn this into a nursery and for reproductive purposes? You know, what are these host plants you can provide? Well, everyone's pretty familiar with milkweed and monarch. So here's a swamp milkweed, or sometimes called rose milkweed. I had one that was supporting 3 dozen monarch caterpillars at one point. It was amazing. But there's other plants. There's the spice bush, which is the host plant for the spice bush swallowtail. And here's its caterpillar. I love these guys with those big fake eyes. And pawpaws, maybe you don't know. I mean, not only can you eat the pawpaws yourself if you're going to grow them, but the leaves are what zebra swallowtail caterpillars eat. And that is just a beautiful butterfly. If you're going to plant pawpaw though, make sure you plant 2 because they need to cross pollinate, to bear fruit. But there's other ways to manage your yard to support wildlife, not, other than providing food for them throughout the year, the 3 seasons. What else do insects and birds need in your yard? Well, first of all, one is, again, freedom from unsafe chemicals, as well as night lights. Here is, how many of you, and usually when I do this in person, which I'm missing, I always ask people to raise their hands and say, how many of you out there don't like fireflies? And of course, nobody's going to raise their hand. Nobody. And anyway, here is the stage of a firefly that you don't often get to see, if ever, because they live in the soil. And so here are the larvae. They're carnivores. They're like predators in the soil, and they eat. You can see this one has extended itself. It's got its head inside a snail shell. It's eating a snail. It eats slugs too. So they're carnivores, and they live in the soil for much of the year before emerging for that month or so as an adult. I'm having some sticky problems here. I don't know why. There. And again, please don't use insecticides because they kill everybody. And as far as night lighting is concerned, I ask people to consider, at least for that month when fireflies are signaling in their mating season to each other, that we don't have these bright lights on all night long in our yards. Why not have the trip lights would be good. That way you get the light when you need it, but you're not messing up their ability to mate with each other and for females to find the males, because that blinking is really critical in how they distinguish not only their own species, but like, who's the coolest male that I want? And there's subtle flash differences in that. Moths too, of course, would benefit from not having night lights. The other thing I want to kind of push a little bit is that, sometimes we're just a little bit too much of a neat in taking care of our yards. And as it turns out, I'm not asking for people to just leave them to be totally messy, but a little bit of unkemptness is what provides complexity and, and habitat diversity for all these critters. Yards can be too neat for wildlife. And just here using a bird example, this tree, and this is in my neighbor's yard, I'm over this way. Anyway, one tree came down and they cut it to this, and I watched this tree rot, and this huge cavity in here. And guess who's been living in it for like 8 years? Has been nesting in there, of Carolina wrens, which I adore. Also, rotting wood, as you will learn, is great habitat for many, provides nests for many bees, native bees. The other thing that does, and what I try to do in certain locations with the right kind of plants, flower stalks, is cut them back to only about 2 feet off the ground for overwintering. And then I might cut off an additional 6 inches in March. But I leave them standing here because certain bees nest in stems like this, or in small branches of shrubs if they can get into a cut surface. Like the small Serotina bees, they call small carpenter bees, because they dig out the pith inside of the stems. You can see it going inside here. And then they go down the stem and start putting balls of pollen, wads of pollen in there, and laying an egg. Pollen, lay an egg, etc. And then the eggs hatch into little larvae, and they eat the pollen, and then they come out. So these stems here are nests. They're bee nests. It's reproductive habitat. Certain grasses, like big blue stem, if you cut it like to 2 feet, they're kind of tube-like at the base, they can provide that kind of habitat for them too. The other big message, especially now coming to fall, is to please consider leaving the leaves, or at least raking them to a section of your yard, put it under shrubs. Hey, it's free mulch, it's free fertilizer, all in one. And if you're going to rake them into a section of your yard, don't have it be any thicker than 6 inches though, and 4 would be better. But still, see if you can save at least some of it, and put them in the back corners or under shrubs in your yard space. And please consider no leaf blowers, and I'll show you why. And also consider leaving your leaves unchopped, and I'll show you why in a second. But what this does, what are all this leaf litter here, as we call it in professionally, we do call it leaf litter. It supplies, this is the supply for the food base of the decomposer food web, which consists of fungi and bacteria, but many insects. And also, and those insects, of course, are bird food. There's a lot of birds, as you know, that, at least some of you do, that get insects out of the leaf litter. And also it's good for your shrubs and other plants because it is insulation in the winter, and also prevents water loss from the soil, but it's also insulation. There's a lot of critters that make it over winter in the leaf litter. And I will also, some people like to run their mowers over the leaves when they fall, and I'm going to ask you not to do that. And here's why. There are many chrysalises of butterflies and some moths that look like leaves. And even if they don't, they're up there on the leaves, they fall down on the ground, even, or if they're on stems, they'll fall on the ground. And if you mow over them, you just mowed over a spice bush swallowtail. And here's an owl butterfly. Can you imagine if one of these, if you were a bird and one of these flipped open its wings? You'd be scared for a week. Anyway, consider not chopping up and mowing your leaves. But so it gets complex. Do consider leaving some bare spots unmulched in your garden, because it makes it easier for ground nesting bees like bumblebees to find spots that they can start making their nests below ground. And 70% of our native bees nest below ground. Here's one cutie just popping its head up. I love that. I love that photo. So all this, obviously, this way of managing your yard can be a win for nature, but what's the win for us? Well, if you grow a vegetable garden, you will bring more pollinators to your vegetable garden. That means, especially, if it's not spinach growing, but a tomato, you'll get more fruit. And bumblebees in particular they're called buzz pollinators, and you might be able to see, this is a little video clip, a GIF, and you can see the pollen being released from these anthers by the buzzing. It's a certain vibration that the bumblebees do on them, and they gather it, but it's also how they will now cross-pollinate your flowers for the fruit. So they're best at pollinating the nightshade family of all the bees, is the bumbles. And the bumblebees, they're not going to sit around waiting all year just for your tomato family plants. Okay, your peppers and your tomatoes and your eggplant, they got to eat the rest of the year too. So that's where your garden flowers can make a difference in their survival. There's also a squash bee, it's so cute. And if you have this garden and there's caterpillars in it, etc., birds will do well. They'll come and they'll also pick insect pests off your trees and garden plants as well. And if you have less lawn space, you will likely be using less water, fertilizer, certainly won't be using pesticides, and less gasoline use, which will improve your personal and your community's health. Another big win, I think, is just having local nature at your doorstep. You can have a lot there. And boy, wouldn't it be great if you have children or grandchildren it's great to go to Bernheim. But you could also have something in the backyard for the kid to look at too, instead of doing this all the time. Got to get them young. So, okay, here comes the part where I just want to show you photos of some cool insects that are in my urban native plant garden. And I would say 90% of the photos are my own, of the insects. And this is what sections of my garden like different locations. Right. They did anyway a couple of months ago. I'm going to show you the lacewings because you had a great spot on it. A couple of folks were pretending to be lacewings and such, and that was a lot of fun. So there are two kinds of lacewings. I learned that this year, the green and the brown. And the green is the one that you see with these, they lay their eggs on these long, slight, slender threads, and here's their eggs, okay? And here's one where they had their eggs, and I flipped the leaf over, and this is a lacewing, a green lacewing larva, which eats aphids. And this is the adult green lacewing. But I'm really proud of showing you this photo here. And yeah, this is a brown lacewing larva in my yard on milkweed. And this is my photo. It's got these pincers and it chases aphids. Just already been put through. Okay, I'm hearing someone else. Sorry. Anyway, it grabbed, you can just see it right here, grabbing an aphid by the butt. Isn't that cool? And this is what the adult looks like, the brown. But I'm really like, I couldn't believe it when I caught pictures of these guys chasing down aphids. So they're predators. Flies, they're important pollinators. And one of the things you're going to see here is how adults are often pollinators, pollen and nectar eaters, but their larvae are predators often and eat other insects. And this one was in my garden on the rattlesnake master, and it is a fly. It's the club midas fly. It's big too. It's like 1.5 inches. And it's got this red band here, so it mimics spider wasps. So birds leave it alone, thinking it's the wasp. And I also learned about this guy that out in prairie meadows, in their rural cousins, they tend to be abundant with his rattlesnake master. So this guy came to my rattlesnake master. So I guess the city cousins like it too. This guy I just thought was so pretty. I'm still trying to figure it out. It's probably a type of soldier fly, but you can see the flies, tell them from wasps and such, by the tiny little V-shaped antennae here and their big frontal, often frontal eyes. Now these are the specialists, the hoverflies, the syrphids. You've heard of these, probably some of you have at least, and they're the bee and wasp mimics and that of course means they're not going to get predated upon by birds and such as much because they think they're bees and wasps. And these were from my garden. This is the northern plushback fly on my zinnia. And then through the spring and in the midsummer, all the teeny tiny calligrapher flies, you can see the calligraphy on, it's like these fine, like somebody just went and finally painted on them, these beautiful designs. And this one's the margin calligrapher, and it's really small. I'm going to say 3 millimeters. The eastern hornet fly, it's a fly, but I even thought it was a hornet at first. You can see the tiny little V-shaped antennae here, these big frontal eyes, and it was the eyes. Once I saw the eyes, I said, oh my God, it's a fly. And it's got only 2 wings. That's why they call it diptera. But sometimes that's hard for people to immediately see, whereas wasps and bees have 4 wings. But those eyes, the eyes are dead giveaways. It's really quite a beautiful fly, I think. And this is another flower fly, the transverse banded flower fly on some flowers in my garden. But I wanted to show you the larva. I finally figured out what they were. I've been seeing these in my garden for about 3 years. They are, I'm going to say, 4 millimeters long, really small. And they have this little tube sticking out. And it turns out this tube is so they can get more oxygen, more air into them. And this is the head over here on this end. And they really move fast. And I was just amazed at them. And this year I got some decent enough photographs that I could share them up on iNaturalist, and experts said, oh, that's a syrphid fly larva. This is it on a trumpet honeysuckle vine leaf, a portion of it here. And they're on the ground though too, and they really scoot and they eat aphids. They're another good one. They're predators. They may not be the lions and the tigers, but they're the foxes of our garden. They're the predators, but they grow up to be flies like these. Other flies that are cool, this will end the flies, but the snipe fly is a predator, really pretty guy. And these feather-legged flies, where the adults, again, they eat pollen and nectar, but they lay eggs, yay, for gardens, on stink bugs and squash bugs. Anyone who has a garden would be pleased to know that. And the tiger bee fly, these are two of them mating. Anyway, they're parasites on carpenter bees. And then I want to show you this guy because I'm really proud of this photo, even though it's not excellent. But this is Myopa, that's the genus, and in a group called the thick-headed flies. When I first saw this guy on my bladder nut shrub, which was loaded with bees, I got this picture. Doesn't it look like a cow? It looks like a little cow head. And then I was watching it, and it would fly up and it would hit the bees and knock them away. I thought it was just like, get out of the way, I want to get some nectar or something. Well, it turns out that behavior, what they're doing, and they're quick, the bee will be coming like this, and they'll come down and go choom like this. And in that instant, they lay an egg on the bee. And so the eggs are parasites on the bees and eat them. But the adults feed on nectar. I just wanted to tell you that story because I think it's cool, and it's a weird looking little fly. Wasps are also important. Again, the story of the adults eating nectar and pollen. And this one's the two-spotted, you see, scoliid wasp, is a parasitoid of the scarab beetle larvae. They lay eggs on scarab beetle larvae. So they're both carnivores at one stage of their life cycle and herbivores in the adult stage of their life cycle. Same thing for the great black digger wasp. It does the same thing. And then just because they're so cool, I don't know how many of you have seen these. First time I ever saw them, I was marveling at all these little clay pots in my garden. And it's the potter wasps. This is just one species of them in the genus Eumenes. And what they do is they keep it open. They go in there and stash it up with caterpillars that are sort of, they've stung and they're paralyzed, but living. And then they will lay an egg in there and then close it up. And then their larva, will then eat the caterpillars that are in there and then break out when it emerges as an adult. Potter wasps. Look out for those. This was on my Maryland, Spigelium marylandica, the Indian pink. And last, because most people don't even know they exist, are these teeny tiny parasitoid wasps. And they're in various groups for conids, but all of these I got in bowls. This is for a study I did with students. And these are pictures I took under the microscope. They're about 2 millimeters or smaller, and they lay eggs on insect larvae, etc. But these two, this one down here on the left with the branched antennae, and then this guy here, are in the chalcid group. They're really small. This guy here, the fairy wasps, look at that wing. Do you see the little tiny feathery brushes coming out of this? This guy is maybe 0.5 millimeter in size. It's floating in water when I took this photo. And they have these little wings that help them fly, because where are they? They live as adults for maybe 5 days under like any perennial shrub, like from the ground to maybe 2 or 3 feet up at most. I caught these at 1 feet off the ground in bowls. And they are, well, the smallest insect in the world is one of these, and it's only 0.13 millimeters in size. And this guy's about 0.5 millimeter and maybe a little smaller. And so these brushes off these threads, feather-like things on the wings, help them float in high humidity spaces in between the leaves. and of your plants. They're all in there. We don't know too much about their ecology yet, but they're called fairy wasps. And they lay eggs on the eggs of other insects like bugs, true bugs, and others, and beetles. So they're great for pest control, but they are small, tiny. So all these guys are very tiny. These, I'm just going to make the point, I'm going to show you about 6 of them, but I want to make the point about where they nest because, and stress that microhabitat diversity they need for your garden to be a bee nursery. Again, the Seratina bee that took this picture, this is a foxglove penstemon stem that overwintered, and it was digging this out. It wasn't a great shot, but you get the idea. That's making a nest in there. You got to keep the stem up, right, for the whole season. And this, just lately on my great blue lobelia, this tiny little master bee, this is the anther, and it's like licking the pollen off because it doesn't have any pollen sacs, so it can't really take pollen back to anywhere. But they're stem nesters too. Then there's the ones that make nests under the bark of rotting logs or wood cavities, etc. And like this pure green sweat bee on the vervain, the blue vervain with tiny, teeny flowers. So teeny bees prefer teeny flowers, tiny little tongues. So that's why the diversity of flower size and such. That's good in the garden. And the slender resin bee, and it's nests in rotting wood cavities. And again, with this genus, the megachilid bees, they don't have pollen sacs on their legs. They get the pollen right under here. Maybe you can see this white row of brushy hairs under here. That's where they collect the pollen, and that's the megachilid bees, the leafcutter and resin bees and mortar bees, and they nest in rotting wood cavities. This is another one, megachilid. And then there's the ground nesters like the bicolored striped sweat bee, one of my all-time favorites. And this, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting again, I can't read it. Something's blocking my screen. But anyways, the longhorn bees, and this is on my wild geranium. And this time of year last year, I took this photo of the metallic epauletted sweat bee on it's not bone set, it's Agriortina that's out there right now. But what a beautiful, beautiful little bee. It's like little jewels. Okay, so I'm wrapping it up, and I think some of you might want to come back to look at this slide perhaps, but if you want to continue your knowledge or join groups that are doing this or groups that might be involved in some local to national scale legislative action, I can recommend 3 Wild Ones Native Plants Natural Landscapes, which is the national office is out in Wisconsin, but we have the Wild Ones Louisville group on Facebook, which if you're on Facebook, just like us, and we give each other advice all the time. Jacqueline knows that. And the National Audubon Society, they have a plant app by zip code and make recommendations of what plants you might want to grow to sustain birds, native plants. And just in terms of invertebrate conservation, the Xerces Society, Bee City USA certification. Wouldn't it be great if Louisville could be a Bee City USA as well as Tree City USA? But those are 3 I recommend. So thanks a lot. I hope we can keep the conversation on biophilia going, and let's keep our common species common. And if anyone has questions, I'd be delighted to take some now. And I'll get out of share mode so I could see you. I've missed seeing you. Oh, no. I want to get out of that. Stop. There it is.
All right. Thank you, Margaret.
Okay.
That was excellent. Thank you. We have time maybe for 1 or 2 questions only.
Oh, no.
Yes, time just gets away from us when we're having such fun.
Yes,
so
I'm sorry.
That's all right.
Margaret, I asked a question, you pretty much have answered it about overwintering, but when do you, so I've got lots of bluebells and trillium and bloodroot and May apples, will they come up through the 4 inches of the unmulched leaves?
Yeah, 3, make it 3.
Make it 3 inches?
Yeah. Because it'll start rotting. It'll be, you know, half rotted, if not all mostly rotted by the time spring comes.
Good, good. Now I have a magnolia back there, but I don't like the magnolia leaves. So
Oh, that's a different kind of leaf. Yeah, those guys don't, I'm talking about like if you have maple with a little bit of oak mix or something, but you know, those kind of leaves.
Lots of oak, and a neighbor has an ash that's still doing very, very well on a lot
Really?
of those leaves coming in my
The
yard.
ash would decay quickly. Oaks will take a little longer, but they still not like a magnolia leaf.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dick. Anyone else? I don't think I saw many questions in the app. Let's see if I missed anything here in the chat. A lot of thank yous for so much, Margaret.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't read any of these comments. Well, I couldn't see your faces. I couldn't see anything when I was doing
Hey,
this.
well, mostly I think the big question was about the overwintering. Is there any more questions that anybody has for Margaret before we sign off? Anyone else? You covered things pretty thoroughly, Margaret, and it was wonderful to be able to see your garden and what you've done with that space. I think we love seeing land that responds to our care.
Yeah, and you know, they may not all live there, but they're certainly living nearby enough, and I'm just happy that they come and visit.
Margaret, I
I'm
guess I
sorry,
do have
sorry
a,
to have taken too long. I'm sorry, I wasn't keeping track. I didn't see the time on the thing or nothing, so.
I do have a follow-up question. What I like to do where I have grass, I don't have much grass, but I have some grass, those leaves I do chop up and then I turn them and use them as mulch. Should I not do that?
Don't chop them up.
Don't chop them up, okay. Just let them decompose.
Yeah. Yeah,
All right.
or if they're in your way, you know, rake them somewhere, but you know, but I don't chop them up. There's too many things that are possibly on those, especially if more of us start taking care of our properties better, there'll be more of these organisms around, you know, and so that's one habit I would not indulge in.
Okay,
That's my recommendation. Obviously, people do what they want to do, but.
Well, Margaret, thank you so very much. And I'd like to
Sorry to
thank
take us so
all
long.
the folks who joined us this evening. I know I learned a lot and I'm very inspired to plant more native plants and to think about the things that we can do in our cities and suburbs to,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I just wanted to see some of the insects I got in my own garden, you know, and it's urban, right? And I'm telling you, right around me, there's nobody else growing flowers. It's really, really depressing.
But
So-
I'm glad that you're a bright spot for all the birds and all these other creatures, the little insects and butterflies and all that. And
They must be surviving somewhere besides my place, so that gives me hope. So,
thank you.
okay, well, thank you, everybody. Hi, Constance, I've just seen you now.
And Kenyetta said, let's see here. I thought this was a nice comment. That if I could find it again. She was surprised to learn how many pollinators transform from carnivores to vegetarians.
That's true. But then
Hey-
back again to carnivores.
Hey, Margaret,
Yeah,
I had a fellow come to my house saying it was totally organic, that he used chrysanthemums, but it's not.
can I explain that to you if you?
Yes,
or
please.
you want to, because I think it's an important point. So here they tell you half truths, okay? The insecticide neurotoxins that are in those sprays are called pyrethroids, okay? And they're chemically made and mimic the natural pyrethrin that is in chrysanthemums, okay? So first of all, chrysanthemums make pyrethrin. but they're not going to make it in high concentrations. They're just making it in enough concentration to deter the worst of, say, leaf miner activity, because mums get, right? So, chrysanthemums of the native variety make a certain amount of this chemical pyrethrin. But they know the organic molecular structure. They change a few endings in there. And there's usually a blend of 3 to 4 pyrethroids, now they're called. You can't call it pyrethrin anymore. And they're at higher concentration. Plants don't make it at that high concentration. So yeah, it's based on an organic compound. But the way I like to say, cyanide is organic too.
Right.
Great point.
Right.
Oh.
Now, organic doesn't mean necessarily safe. It's supposedly safe for us, okay? And although they tell us, supposedly safe for us, but they tell us to stay away for a few hours, right? But it's not safe for insects because they are insect neurotoxins. And then I heard one guy say, well, we're very careful about the bees because all he's thinking about is honeybees. Okay, he knows nothing about native bees. And he said, what we do is we aim down so that it goes down towards the ground. Well, 70% of our native bees, bumblebees included, are ground nesters. So, for those hours, and of course, this stuff is supposed to stay active. They come out every month to spray your yard? I don't know. So there's got to be some activity levels over that month. So it's really, it kills caterpillars, it kills butterflies, it kills them all. It's not specific to mosquitoes. And really the control for me is the larvae, all right? And so keeping water, keeping your gutters clean, keeping containers that hold water, even if it's a little bucket or jar, turn them upside down, or the kiddie pool or whatever. In the summer, there's a couple of species of mosquitoes here that can make it from egg to adult in 4 days in summer hot temperatures. So as long as you dump like your bird bath or whatever every 3 or 4 days, you're good, right? Or put those dunks in that the Bacillus thuringiensis that's just made for mosquitoes, and it doesn't hurt caterpillars, it hurts mosquitoes, and they're safe for birds to drink apparently. But there's other ways to do it, or if you're sitting out and you're annoyed, you're gonna have a few guests and they happen to be annoying, or I understand, but I know people put fans out because mosquitoes are very poor flyers, and if you have a fan going, they will generally stay away from you. And I prefer to spray me if I'm really in the thick of somewhere, whatever, to spray me than my entire yard.
Right.
That's my, that's all I can offer is points to think about. But yeah, organic. You can tell them cyanide's organic too.
Yeah. Thank you.
And these, yeah. Okay.
Thank you again, Margaret. Thanks
Yeah.
thank you all who had such good questions and just being a part of it. I'm really grateful. I'm going to go ahead.
Thank you for allowing me to be a part of this.
It's delightful,
fun.
Margaret. I'm looking forward
Okay.
to meeting you.
I hope
Good night,
so
everybody.
soon.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.